Thank you for being here with me, Jennifer. I'm so excited about this conversation we're going to have. When I saw your name and what you do, I immediately wanted to have you on this podcast. So we're going to get into some really great topics. But first, let me just give you a chance to introduce yourself to my audience, explain who you are, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you. I'm so excited for this conversation as well. So my name is Jennifer Boudrye, and I am a queer allyship facilitator. So what in the world is that? So I'm an ally. I am also the parent of queer people. I have a bi guy and a trans man. And I have been working in education and supporting people and providing resources for a bazillion years. So I am now in a space where I am helping parents who are trying to figure out how to best support their kids, maybe initially feeling some shock or some sadness, confusion. And I also work with organizations that are looking to develop more inclusive communities and inclusive spaces.
It's so wonderful what you're doing. And I love that you have those two buckets that you get into because it can be a really big roller coaster as a parent when this is something that happens and you weren't expecting it. You don't know how to approach it. And many of the parents I work with have queer kids or find out that they have queer kids, and their love for them is still exactly the same, but they're really like doubting themselves and wondering, how the heck do I navigate this without, messing everything up and saying the wrong thing? So having a resource like you is so helpful. So let me just kind of start with the very basics. And if you could just explain to us, what does it mean to be an ally?
Sure. So being an ally, I will often explain to people that I, first of all, will never understand what it truly is to be a queer person because I'm not, right? And so my job as an ally is really to stand in front and take the arrows and then step aside and amplify the queer voices that are needing to be heard and the people who are needing to be seen. So the process that I use, especially with parents, is the C.A.R.E process, which is compassion, awareness, respect, and empathy. And so as parents, we find out we literally, our entire job is about keeping our kids safe, right? We want them to be healthy and happy. And so we always, when we find out that there's a challenge, we want to go in and we want to fix, right? And this is something that, first of all, doesn't need to be fixed, but is going to trigger something in us, right? We're afraid for our kids. We want something to happen. And so respecting them, or being aware, first of all, of what their queer identity is all about, is a really important piece. There are a lot of misunderstandings and some lack of awareness around the different aspects of queer identity. Respecting who your kid is, believing that your child knows who they are, right? And I tell parents all the time, believe who your child tells you that they are in this moment. It might change, might change again and again, and that's all good. And then the empathy piece is really about going back to that initial statement of not understanding, right? I don't have to step in and fix. I just have to provide an opportunity for my kid to come and talk to me and let me know how they're feeling and what they are experiencing, validating their experience, and then determining, is there action I need to take, and working with your kid to make sure that the action that you take is actually going to be effective.
Yeah, I really love that idea of what it means to be an ally, being more proactive versus just accepting. There can be a misunderstanding of I'm an ally because I accept and I honor this person and their choices. But it's more than that. It's actually being a shield to protect. And what you said was amplify. There's a couple other things you talked about, but I'm wondering if you could give a little more clarity on what does that mean to amplify?
Yeah, so it is, there's so much trying to condense it, right? This is the whole
Yeah.
process. But it really is giving voice, allowing people who may have, let me first off start by saying that we all have biases, right?
Yeah.
All of us. And I could do a whole conversation on deconstructing and rewiring biases. But it's recognizing that the person who is queer is at risk sometimes, right? And so in order for others who are strongly holding on to their biases or not, maybe not even be aware of them, to be able to validate the experience and the voice of the queer person, there has to be somebody that can help shield, as you said, shield them, right? And be able to do the education, do the explanation, getting people to a point where then they are ready and able to hear and validate the experience of the queer person. Right?
Okay.
It's not okay for marginalized people to have to do all of the heavy lifting of the education and all of that emotional work. That's my job. I walk around with a whole lot of privilege,
Yeah.
and I can handle that so that then my queer friends, my queer family members don't have to go through that initial conflict.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really great explanation. And it actually brings to mind for me one of the things that can be most challenging, and the teens that I work with talk about this a lot, is their parents are fully accepting and they are an ally, but when the family members come around, not all of the family members understand or acknowledge, and they're working from their own biases. How can parents navigate those types of scenarios?
Yeah. So I will always start those conversations with, tell me how it is you got to that understanding.
Mhm.
Like, where does this come from? And for some folks, it's a religious perspective.
Yeah.
And so we have to sort of deconstruct their religious beliefs. And I usually, always explain to folks that I have a daughter who is a Lutheran pastor and her husband is a Presbyterian pastor. So I'm pretty well versed in the different uh, perspectives. And the bottom line being that most powers, whether it's God or whomever, whatever you're referring to, the underlying commonality is love, right? And so if we can humanize the person that we're talking about and recognize that this is an individual human who is deserving of love, let's start there, right? So what is it we love about this person? Before you knew this information, you loved all of this about this person. Those things are still the same. And I had to go through this with my own father, who was on the opposite side of everything that I feel and believe. But he
Mhm.
loved his grandson, right?
Yeah.
Always had.
Yeah.
And when my son came out as bisexual, he had to recognize that this is still that same kid,
Yeah.
right? And he really, truly shifted his perspective.
Mhm.
And so I think it's coming down to the humanity of it, right?
Right.
But then it's also, there's a lot of family dynamics. Oof, they can be
Yeah.
rough, right? And so you have to figure out what the relationship can be.
Mhm.
You have to figure out what boundaries need to be in place, right? Again, as a parent, your job is to keep those kiddos safe. Sometimes that means not sharing information,
Yeah.
right? And what I call code, proactive code switching, being
Mhm.
able to protect your child and their identity and figure out the way to be the intermediary to have relationships that are going to be safe
Yeah.
for everyone.
So you're really advocating for them. And what I found worked for me was to ask my girls, they're
Oh,
both bisexual, ask them, is it okay if I share this information? I'll follow your lead. You tell me. And fortunately, my family, was no issues, no conflict or anything like that. But that makes total sense. And being that barrier, and you mentioned boundaries, and not to get like into the thick of it all, but really, let's just say a scenario. There's family, we're nearing the holiday season. There's family gatherings. Let's say one of my listeners, their teen came out to them and they want to be as supportive as possible, yet they know there are family members that would really have a hard time with it. They can completely like code switch, as you said. If the teen is open to sharing, and let's say a family member isn't so accepting, even through the conversations, like you mentioned, what might implementing boundaries in that situation entail?
so I'm actually getting ready to release an entire workshop on this.
Oh, fantastic.
So we'll have more coming down
Okay.
the pipe. But I think one of the biggest and the most important things is to know that you always have a choice,
Yeah.
right? And so the boundary can look like, this is who my child is. There can be no conversation about their identity that makes them feel in any way bad, or we leave.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's a rough thing for a lot of people, right?
Mhm.
But it is, that's just one example. We can, and it's not, we can agree to disagree, because you're not disagreeing about someone's identity, but
Yeah.
you're agreeing to certain scripts,
Hmm. Okay.
right? You're agreeing that certain conversations are not going to take place.
Yeah.
And often what happens is, again, that family experiences this person as themselves, and they aren't thinking about or focusing on the identity. That's just one part of who this person is,
Right.
right? And then it becomes easier for them to approach conversations that in the first place might have been really challenging.
Okay. And another thing that I found the parents I work with and the teens that I've worked with in the past is the teen is coming to the parent and expressing their identity or questioning and wondering, I think I might be gay, or maybe I'm bisexual, or wanting to go by different pronouns. And the parent is maybe not saying to the teen, but saying to me that one of their concerns is, well, I think they're too young to really know. And if I go ahead and just allow them to do this, what if, down the road they change their mind? And, that, and also I feel like they're being influenced by social media or friends, and maybe this isn't really who they are. What would you say about that? What kind of advice do you have to give for that?
Yeah. So I will also preface by saying that I am a trained librarian. So
Oh,
research is really important to me. And I
okay.
always want to make sure that when I say research, I mean, you got to trust that I'm actually
Yeah.
citing research that is reliable. So the research shows that children know their own gender by around age 3.
Okay.
Okay, so they have a concept of who they are. If they're in a family where they express that they are other than the gender that they were assigned at birth, and that is accepted, they may end up to, be transgender and be supported all the way through. But if they're coming into a family that isn't sure, right? And again, those biases, we all have all of this conditioning, right? They might put that aside, right? Or hide that from themselves and then come out later in life. And I will point to my bonus son, who is trans, came out at age 24
Okay.
as trans, had grown up lesbian, female,
Hmm.
recognized that that was not his true self, right? Flash forward, he has gone through full transition, medical, surgical, and social and legal, and is married to a cisgender woman. When they had their first child, they're expecting their second now. Um, he came back and he was like, he had the first sonogram. He's like, it's a boy. And my first thought was, is it? You're a transgender man. You know, penis does not necessarily
Right.
mean boy, right? And so I share that as an example of how deeply ingrained this
Yes.
conditioning is, right? So every parent assumes that their child is the gender that they were assigned, so
Right.
often before birth. So it's hard to let go of that. This is where we get that feeling.
Hmm.
Um, and so what we have to understand is, so when it comes to gender identity, it can be fixed very early, but that it can be repressed. I have
Yeah.
friends that are coming out at 55
Okay.
as transgender and looking back and going, oh, that's what that was. Right.
Right.
They didn't have the language. They didn't have, the visibility. They didn't have the examples and the models that they could follow. So that's where a lot of this is coming from. So when people talk about the social media, just like books, are not going to cause anyone to change their identity. What they can do, and what social media often does, is provide examples. It provides the visibility that people can go, oh, that's what I'm feeling. This is the name for that, right? So we have more language.
Okay.
Children also know their sexual orientation by around pre-puberty, but it can also change
Yeah.
because, again, so much of this comes down to our social conditioning of what is normal, right? And as people recognize that they are feeling differently than the way they might have been told they should be feeling, and they see examples of it, it can change, right? And I always want to tell parents, like, when I think about all of the ways that I have changed throughout my lifetime, in ways that I've dressed, in the ways that I have thought, in the ways that that I speak, the jobs that I hold,
Yeah.
why we expect anyone to stick with one part of their identity forever. It's a little, it sells people short.
Yeah.
So when we see this often during adolescence, right, where kids are trying to figure out who they are in every area of their
Yeah.
lives, and they'll try on different identities,
Mhm.
and that's okay. And they'll figure it out, and it still might change, right? Sexuality and sexual orientation is not a static thing for a lot of people. And so again, this is where, I tell people, believe who your child tells you that they are in this
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah.
That's it. And so I want to say three things that I tell parents when child comes out to you as queer.
Yeah.
Three things to say. First is, I love you. Hard stop. No matter what, right? You don't conditionalize it. I love you. Two, thank you for trusting me with this information. You've got to know, if a kid is coming out to you, they have been thinking about it for a while. It
Right.
might be brand new to you, but they've been wondering or questioning, right?
Mhm.
And then the third thing is, what do you need from me to feel supported right now? And that's where, when it comes to, I often say parents and children are on their own paths through this journey, but the child, as you said, the child is in the lead with this. It's their story. And so that might be that they need you to tell other family members, or not tell other family members, or help them get the information that they need, or the care that they need.
Yeah.
They may just need a hug.
Yeah. It's a really loving approach, and it's very affirming and validating. And what a wonderful space to be held in sharing something that can be very scary to share.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to know, another thing that the teens that I've worked with in the past talk about is how their parents have a lot of questions, but they don't want to have to be the one to explain everything. So, what can parents do to get their questions answered without having to bother their kid about it?
Well, they can call me, right? I'm
Okay. Yeah.
always there. But again, as a librarian, I like to provide a lot of resources all the time.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so I will say a couple of places that parents should always go. One is PFLAG, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, is what the original name of the organization was. And their website has a ton of resources and information. And they provide a lot of support groups for families of queer folks. And I think it's amazingly wonderful to be among other people who are experiencing the same things that you are, right? Finding those folks who have common experience. Another place is the Trevor Project, which has incredible resources. I will say that when you get into digging into the statistics around mental health, it can be really scary.
Yeah.
But always look at those statistics and know that these are the terrifying statistics, and they are real, right? They are truly can be a matter of life and not for some. Are situations where people don't have affirming allies and don't have the support. So if you are a parent who is able to provide the support and the willing, the affirmation for your kid, chances are they're not falling into those statistics, right? But it's good information to have. And another one is the HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign. It has a lot of really good information.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and make sure I have links to those in the show notes so that parents can go and check those out. That's super helpful. And I'm just curious to know if you have experienced in the parents and corporations and just humans that you've worked with, what might be some mistakes that parents could make inadvertently without realizing it, wanting to do what's best for their child, but that they overlook and that could be avoided? If you have any that you have seen, I'd love to hear. you share
I'll
with them.
share another one of my own
Okay.
mistake that I made,
Yeah.
right? Because I'm a human being as well. So I grew up 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Pick a team, right? You're either straight or gay. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter to me which. We're fine.
Hmm.
So I consider myself a very strong ally.
Hmm.
And when my son was growing up, I was pretty sure that he wasn't straight. No big deal. Assumed he was gay.
Yeah.
No worries. So he grows up through life and he's not really dating anyone, not seeing any relationships, and not sure what's happening with that. So he goes off to college. And at this point, we had open conversations about him being gay. Goes to college and is called the F slur on campus and writes an op-ed for his college newspaper because that's the kind of kid he is.
Okay.
And in the article, he came out as bisexual. And
Okay.
I was like, what? I don't know what that is, really. I
Uh-huh.
don't understand, right? I just didn't have the awareness. I will say he's 28 now. This happened when he was 19. So it was
Okay.
many years ago.
It's been a while.
Um, Obviously, I have learned quite a bit more. But about 6 months ago, he and I were talking about his coming out story.
Mhm.
And he shared with me that my pick a team mentality throughout his life had caused him to deny his bisexuality to himself and to me. And that was really painful, especially considering the work that I do now,
Yeah.
right? We had to go back and really do some repair work and recognize that it was my lack of awareness and my assumption rather than learning and being who figuring out who he was, letting him share with me. I placed this label on him and I just went with it. And I didn't really pay attention to what it was causing for him. And so, it goes back to not making assumptions, going into that place. And this is something that my children have shared with me. I have two older daughters as well, that I lived in a place of compassion a lot as a parent. I always wanted to fix, right? You came to
Yeah.
me with an issue. Let me fix that for you.
Mhm.
And what they needed all along was a lot more empathy, a lot more of me just listening and being with them so that I
Yeah.
could hear and understand what they needed.
Yeah, listening is one of the best tools that you can have as a parent in all areas.
Yeah.
And I can see how that would apply, especially in this area too, when they are figuring things out and potentially confused, when they have a space where they
Yeah.
can say whatever they need to say without your input.
Yeah. I'm going to give you another couple that I see often,
Yep.
and this goes through, there's a whole process of coming out, right? There are many steps
Yeah.
along the way. And one of the steps is pride, right? Being really excited. And I
Mhm.
have seen parents, as soon as they find out that their kid is queer, just rainbow everything
Okay.
and declare it to the world. And that's not
Mhm.
always something that the kid wants,
Yeah.
right? So again, it's a
Mhm.
matter of respect and understanding that this is their story to tell,
Okay.
and that you as an ally have a very important role, but your role isn't necessarily to share it with the world, right?
Right.
And another one that I see often that is really hard for parents is dumping your emotional baggage and
Yeah.
expecting your kid to carry that for you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Not appropriate. And that's
They've
why
got enough stuff that they're
they
dealing with.
do. And part of being the grown up in the room is knowing that sometimes you have a heavier burden to carry, right? And that's where you look for support groups, you look for coaches, you look for places that you can share that and spare your child having to carry that for you.
Yeah, and on the topic of that it can be really challenging for the teenager or preteen, what resources can parents look into or find to help support their child through this process?
Yeah. PFLAG is a great place to start,
Okay.
right? Really is. Because it's not just support groups for the parents, it's often support groups for the kids.
Okay.
And I think it's really important for kids to be in groups with peers that are, again, experiencing similar things. If your school has a GSA, a Gender Sexuality Alliance, making sure that that group is fully supported, and that kids are free to attend those meetings and are aware of
Okay.
them. And there are other organizations like GLSEN which does a lot of work within schools.
Okay.
And looking for, within your local community, are there queer community centers or places where kids can gather?
Yeah. And that is really part of it is normalizing it by exposing them to other people who are going through it at the same time and having potentially having those who are older and have
Mhm.
gone through to be an ally as well. So it's really a community thing is what I'm
It
hearing.
is. And there's also another resource that I have called Queer Camp Fair, which
I saw
is
that and I was going to ask you, tell me more about Queer Camp Fair.
so again, being a librarian, I like to consolidate information, right, and organize it. And it occurred to me over the last several years as I've been doing this work that summer camp is a place where a lot of kids are going to be, finding their joy. And so wanting to have a place where there were vetted camps where camp parents could go to know without a doubt that these camps have declared themselves as being affirming,
Yeah.
became a really important project. So last year, I started it last year, and we're going to be building it out even more this year. It's a resource where it's a listing of all of the queer affirming camps in North America. And again, I've gone through a vetting process with them. I cannot guarantee that every camp is as affirming and perfect as we want them to be, right? So there's a little disclaimer there. But
Yeah.
the reality that camps are willing to put themselves in a resource called Queer Camp Fair is a
Yeah.
big step, right? And there are camps that I've talked to that are like, we're not really sure we want to be listed there. I'm like, then you're not affirming.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good to know.
And that's so great because there are so many great summer camp programs, and those really can be life changing
Oh,
for
yeah.
kids. And to be able to know that it's a safe place, because I have had teen clients in the past who have gone to summer camps and they know that it's not accepting. And so they have to, like you said, code switch so that
Yeah.
they can not be singled out or feel left out. And just to have a resource like that where the parents and the teens can look at it and make a decision with that little knowledge, the safety and knowing that they are
It's a starting place for sure.
absolutely. Yeah. And also, if parents or if anyone is listening to this and really realizing that they have a lot of thoughts and beliefs about either any type of identity that their teenager may come up to them and realize that that may be putting a divide in their relationship or even in their experience with their kid. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you work with parents?
Yeah. So I do one-on-one coaching,
Okay.
and I approach everyone where they are, right? And so it starts out with, tell me where your beliefs came from, right? And we can dig into that. And it is a lot of self-exploration. Um, and recognizing that we're not responsible for the biases that we hold, but we are responsible for identifying them and working to dismantle them so that we can love the people that are in our lives, right? And be the best possible parent. And I will say, I have had parents where I've had to be very blunt to say, this is a choice. You can choose to love the child that you have, or you can choose to no longer have a relationship with them. May not happen today, may not happen next year, but at some point that child has the right to make the decision that this relationship isn't healthy for them. And so if you want to maintain a relationship with your child, you need to get on board
Yeah.
and believe who they are and become their ally.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I do have, I know too many people who have lost relationships with their children. Um, and it's so sad and not necessary.
Right. And I know that my listeners are parents who do want a close relationship with their teenager. And as with any relationship, there are things that come up that really shake foundations and help you have you questioning what is it I really believe and having the courage to stand against some of the things that you had really firmly believed for too long
Yeah.
and accepting. And it sounds like, at least what I'm gathering, your approach is very compassionate. And it
Yeah.
sounds like it would be a very safe container to be able to express some of the thoughts that we have, because those, there's a fear of judgment. So one-on-one coaching sounds like a fabulous resource. And I know you also work with corporations as well and businesses. Is that correct?
Yeah. I do a lot of LGBTQ 101
Okay.
and a lot of creating inclusive environments.
Yeah.
It is really, it's amazing to me because I'm in it, right? I'm a fish swimming in this water, forgetting that not everyone
Yeah.
is as aware.
Mhm.
And so there's still, again, at a global level, having to dismantle misunderstandings and having folks recognize that, again, research shows that being an affirming workplace is good business.
Yeah.
And so, regardless of what's happening on a political sphere,
Mhm.
treating humans with respect is a really, really good thing.
And what I really want to highlight here is what you said about that the source of it all is love. And if parents are able to really take that on and own that and let that permeate every interaction they have throughout their journey as a parent, that's really at the core of it. Yeah.
And it's getting to understand all of us when we parent, I would assume, our goal is to raise independent, autonomous humans,
Yep.
right? And so recognizing that a child's identity, their queer identity, is part of who they are, but it's not the entirety of who they are. And we have to get to know the person that they actually are, not who we thought they might be.
Yeah. And our brain likes to make things as simple as possible by categorizing and
Mm-hmm.
putting things into little pockets. And sometimes it's not as clear of a pocket, and
No.
there can be multiple pockets.
Yes. In the pocket, they can change and they
Yep,
can have
they're
multiple
moving around
pockets at the
all over the
same
place.
time.
And it makes your brain go a little wild, right? That's
Yes.
why it can be such a challenging experience.
Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
where, again, it's important for people to remember I will never, you're not going to understand it. You don't have to understand it.
Yes.
You just have to love them.
Yes. And that's, even though it sounds easy, it can be challenging because of all these other things, but that's really what it's all about is I love you no matter what. I love you even more when you're being who you are
Absolutely.
authentically. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on and sharing your information. And I'm going to be putting your contact information in the show notes so
Awesome.
people can reach out to you and follow you and find you and learn from you and your workshops and everything. But Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this information. I really appreciate having you here.
I love the conversation. Thank you so much.